Dr. Ryan Levy, a respected and dedicated surgeon, had just completed one of the most intense surgeries of his career. It was a heart operation on a 3-month-old baby, a case that no other doctor in the hospital dared to take on. For hours, Ryan worked tirelessly in the operating room, his concentration unwavering despite the growing fatigue. The operation was a success, and the baby, against all odds, was saved. Yet, for Ryan, the reward of saving a life was bittersweet, as it was a mere part of a far larger, more complex story that weighed heavily on him. After the long procedure, Ryan felt completely drained, his body and mind exhausted from the constant pressure. The room around him seemed to close in as he stumbled to the staff room. His colleagues, many of whom had considered the case too risky, had left him to carry the burden alone. They admired him for his skill, but they also feared the consequences of such high-stakes surgery. Ryan, however, did not hesitate. He had made a promise to his patients, especially the most vulnerable, and he would do whatever it took to fulfill it. After the surgery, he collapsed onto a sofa in the staff room, still wearing his surgical mask and glasses, barely able to keep his eyes open. As Ryan drifted off to sleep, he reflected on the night's events. The surgery had been difficult, but what exhausted him even more was the toll it was taking on his personal life. He had been married to Pam for over 10 years, but their relationship was deteriorating. Pam, a successful makeup artist, had a strong personality, and she expected a certain lifestyle. Despite Ryan's success as a surgeon, he didn't make nearly enough to keep up with Pam's desires. She ran her own beauty salon, investing all her earnings into it, and Ryan had to foot most of their living expenses. As a result, they struggled financially, with Ryan's modest salary barely stretching to meet their needs. Pam was increasingly dissatisfied with Ryan's commitment to his job. She wanted him to spend more time at home, to be more present in their marriage, but Ryan felt obligated to his work. The patients needed him, especially those who didn't have anywhere else to turn. He had spent years building his career, and for him, every patient was a responsibility he could not abandon. But Pam, growing more impatient, didn't understand why Ryan couldn't just take a break and spend time with her. To her, he was becoming a stranger. She complained about his long hours and the lack of attention he paid to her needs. Ryan's devotion to his career came at a heavy cost. It wasn't just his marriage that was suffering, it was his happiness as well. He had become increasingly disillusioned with the idea that his success in the operating room was enough to justify the neglect in his personal life. He had earned the respect of his colleagues, the gratitude of his patients, and the admiration of the interns who looked up to him. But it seemed that all of that recognition meant little when he went home to an empty house, where the silence echoed louder than any applause. The exhaustion Ryan felt after the surgery was a physical manifestation of the toll his life had taken. He had devoted himself to his work, but in doing so, he had neglected the people who mattered most. As he lay on the couch, his body finally giving way to rest, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had to change. But what? He had been trained to save lives, to operate with precision, but could he fix the broken parts of his own life? His marriage, his relationships, his sense of self? All of it felt like an operation waiting to be performed, but he wasn't sure where to begin. In the early hours of the morning, as Ryan lay asleep, the quiet of the staff room became a temporary escape from the chaos of his life. His phone buzzed, but he didn't hear it. His thoughts, however, were interrupted by the very real consequences of his choices, a reality he would soon have to confront head-on. But for now, he allowed himself a brief respite, hoping that somehow things would work themselves out. Ryan had always been the man who prioritized duty above everything else. As a dedicated surgeon, his life had revolved around long hours in the operating room and caring for his patients. Yet, in the quiet moments between surgeries, the reality of his personal life began to weigh heavily on him. Pam, his wife, had become increasingly frustrated with his absence, with his focus always elsewhere. Their marriage, once full of love, was now overshadowed by unmet expectations, and Ryan's sense of duty to his work made him feel disconnected from the woman he had once adored. The tension between them reached its breaking point after Ryan returned home one morning. He had just completed another grueling surgery, one that had drained every ounce of his energy. Pam, as usual, was waiting for him with her demands and complaints. Her tone was sharp as she asked, "Another night at the hospital, Ryan?" She was disappointed yet again that her husband had chosen work over spending time with her. The argument that followed was nothing new. Ryan, exhausted and mentally drained, tried to explain that the surgery had been crucial. A baby's life had been on the line, and he had done everything he could to save it. But Pam wasn't listening. She was angry, hurt, and feeling neglected. It was as though their relationship had been reduced to a list of grievances, and neither of them knew how to fix it. Pam's frustration had been building for months, and she finally confronted Ryan with the harsh truth. "You've been distant for so long, I don't even recognize you anymore," she said. "All you do is work. You don't pay attention to me. You don't care about what I need." Ryan's heart sank as he listened to her words. Deep down, he knew she was right. He had been neglecting their marriage, and in doing so, he had lost the connection they once shared. But at that moment, he felt torn. His career had always been his passion, and he couldn't just walk away from it. He couldn't stop being the person who saved lives. Yet at the same time, he couldn't ignore the fact that his personal life was crumbling. Pam's frustration turned to resentment, and in a voice laced with bitterness, she declared, "I don't know how much longer. I can do this, Ryan. You're never here, and when you are, you're a stranger. You've become so consumed by your work that you've forgotten about me." Ryan, trying to hold on to whatever semblance of control he had, tried to reassure her. "Pam, I'm just doing my job. I can't leave people in need, not when I have the skills to help them. You know this." But Pam was no longer interested in explanations. Her patience had run out. The conversation shifted to something neither of them expected. Pam's voice grew cold as she said, "I can't do this anymore. I've found someone else." Ryan froze, the words hitting him like a blow. It was as though the ground beneath him had shifted. Pam had been seeing someone else, and now she was ready to leave him for good. Ryan felt a deep sense of betrayal. The woman he had spent over a decade with, the woman he had thought would be by his side through thick and thin, was now telling him she had found someone else. His mind raced as he tried to process the shock. How had things gotten this bad? How had he allowed his career to take precedence over everything else, even the woman he loved? Pam's words were final, and there was no going back. She packed her things and left, leaving Ryan in the emptiness of their shared home. The silence in the apartment was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos of the hospital that Ryan had come to know so well. For the first time in a long while, Ryan felt completely alone. His career, his patience, and his work had always been there for him, but now, he realized, they were no substitute for the human connection he had lost. As he stood in the apartment, surrounded by the remnants of his failed marriage, Ryan felt a wave of regret wash over him. He had sacrificed so much for his work, but in doing so, he had lost what mattered most. He didn't know how to fix it, but he knew one thing for certain. His life couldn't continue like this. Something had to change. But what? The answer wasn't clear, and it would take time for Ryan to truly understand the consequences of his choices. With Pam gone, Ryan was left to reflect on the life he had built for himself, a life that, despite all his accomplishments, had left him feeling empty and unfulfilled. He had saved lives, yes, but had he truly lived his own life? In the quiet aftermath of his failed marriage, Ryan knew that it was time to make a change, but what that change would look like, he still didn't know. The days ahead would be challenging, but Ryan knew one thing. He needed to find balance. He had to figure out how to be true to himself without sacrificing the things that truly mattered. The road ahead was uncertain, but Ryan was determined to rebuild, not just his career, but his life. Ryan's life had taken a sudden, unexpected turn. After his divorce from Pam, the quiet, empty space in his home mirrored the emptiness he felt inside. His work, once the center of his universe, was no longer enough to fill the void left by the crumbling of his marriage. He had always believed that his identity as a surgeon defined him, that the lives he saved, the gratitude of his patients, and his role in the hospital were enough to justify the sacrifices he made in his personal life. But now, standing alone, in the silence of his apartment, he realized how much he had lost in the pursuit of success. Yet, life had a way of surprising him. Amid the darkness, something shifted within him when he met Morgan, a homeless woman who had been brought into the hospital for urgent surgery. She had no family, no home, and no documents, but she needed care, and Ryan couldn't turn her away. His oath as a doctor had always been clear: to help those in need, no matter their background or circumstances. And Morgan's situation struck a chord with him. She wasn't just another patient. She was someone in dire need of compassion and kindness, just like so many others he had helped throughout his career. Ryan's decision to take on her case wasn't based on any sense of obligation, but rather on his deep empathy for her. He couldn't bear to see her turned away from the hospital simply because of her status as a homeless person. As he worked on her surgery, he was reminded of his own humanity, something he had neglected for years. When Morgan regained consciousness, she was bewildered, not understanding why a doctor like Ryan would go out of his way to help someone like her. But Ryan saw something in her, something that made him want to reach out and help in ways beyond the operating room. Morgan's life story unfolded before him in their conversations. She had once been a successful woman, married to a man named Dennis, and living a comfortable life. But everything changed when Dennis died of cancer, leaving her alone and at the mercy of her stepdaughter, Amber, who was nothing short of cruel. Amber's hatred toward Morgan led to her being thrown out onto the streets, her life spiraling downward. Morgan's descent into homelessness had not been a choice, but a series of unfortunate events beyond her control. It was this understanding of her vulnerability that made Ryan decide to help her in ways that went beyond just medical care. Ryan knew that he couldn't simply release her back onto the streets after the surgery. He had seen the toll that life had taken on Morgan, and he felt compelled to offer her more than just a temporary solution. He offered her a place to stay, at least until she could get back on her feet. It wasn't much, just a spare room in his apartment, but for Morgan, it was everything. She had nowhere else to go, and Ryan knew he couldn't leave her to fend for herself. Despite his own emotional turmoil from his failed marriage, Ryan found comfort in offering Morgan a safe space, a place where she could heal both physically and emotionally. As she recovered, Morgan began to help around the apartment. She cleaned, cooked, and did the chores Ryan never had time for. Slowly, she began to find a sense of purpose in his home, and Ryan, in turn, found solace in her company. The loneliness that had plagued him after the divorce began to lift, and he realized that in helping Morgan, he was also helping himself. The two grew close, not out of romantic interest, but out of mutual respect and a shared understanding of hardship. Ryan didn't ask for anything in return for his kindness. He simply wanted to help. Morgan, grateful for the opportunity, began to recover from her traumatic past, finding work at a local beauty salon and starting to build her life back up. She was no longer the woman who had wandered the streets in despair. She was a woman, reclaiming her dignity, one step at a time. For Ryan, this new chapter in his life wasn't just about rescuing someone in need. It was about rediscovering his own humanity. He had always been a man of principles, but helping Morgan showed him that there was more to life than just duty. His work had given him purpose, but now it was his relationships that began to fill the gaps. Morgan's gratitude and the small, everyday moments they shared gave him a sense of fulfillment that his career had never been able to provide. In the process of helping Morgan, Ryan began to see his life in a new light. He realized that success wasn't measured by the number of surgeries he performed or the lives he saved in the operating room. True success, he began to understand, was about the connections we make with others, the love we share, and the kindness we give. Morgan wasn't just a patient or a temporary guest in his home. She had become a part of his life, and in helping her, Ryan found the sense of purpose he had been searching for all along. Through their time together, Ryan learned that sometimes the most important things in life aren't the ones we can control. His journey wasn't just about saving lives in the operating room. It was also about opening his heart to those who needed him most. And as he looked at Morgan, he realized that the small acts of kindness, the ones that don't come with applause or recognition, were the ones that truly mattered. After Morgan's surgery, Ryan couldn't stop thinking about her. She wasn't just another patient. She was a person who had fallen through the cracks of society, someone whom the world had discarded. As a doctor, Ryan had always been committed to saving lives, but something about Morgan's situation resonated deeply with him. She wasn't just physically wounded. She had suffered emotional and mental scars from the hardships she had faced. No one, especially not someone who had been through so much, deserved to be treated like an outsider. This realization, this deep sense of empathy, made Ryan feel that he needed to do more for her than just perform a successful surgery. Morgan had no family, no home, and no documents. She was stranded in a hospital room with no clear path forward. But Ryan couldn't bear to send her back to the streets, a life of uncertainty, pain, and isolation. His medical oath had always been to help, but this time he felt his moral obligation stretched far beyond the confines of the operating room. He had seen the physical damage Morgan had endured, but what he hadn't known until she opened up to him was the emotional and psychological damage that had nearly destroyed her. Over the next few days, as Morgan rested and recovered in the hospital, Ryan took the time to sit with her and listen to her story. Morgan's tale was one of heartbreak and betrayal, of losing everything she had once held dear. She had been married to Dennis, a kind and loving man who was well off, but after his sudden death from lung cancer, Morgan's world had come crashing down. Grief-stricken and alone, she had tried to find solace, but the worst was yet to come. It wasn't just her loss that she had to bear. It was the cruelty of her stepdaughter, Amber. When Morgan's husband passed away, Amber, his daughter from a previous marriage, turned on her. Amber had always harbored resentment toward Morgan, but after Dennis's death, the animosity escalated. Amber kicked Morgan out of the house, forcing her to leave everything behind. Morgan, disoriented and grief-stricken, had no choice but to leave. She had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Her life, once filled with stability and comfort, had become a nightmare. Ryan listened intently as Morgan explained how Amber had treated her, how she had taken everything from her and left her on the streets. "I never imagined this could happen to me," Morgan said, tears welling in her eyes. "I was so naive, thinking that my marriage and family would protect me from the world, but it was all taken away in an instant." Ryan could see the pain in her eyes, the kind of pain that didn't just come from losing material possessions, but from being completely abandoned by the people who were supposed to care for her. Despite her suffering, Morgan refused to stay angry. She wasn't bitter toward Dennis or even Amber. She was just sad, exhausted by the constant struggle to survive. "I don't know what happened to me," Morgan said, her voice trembling. "I went from living in a beautiful home to sleeping on benches and begging for food. I used to be someone who had everything, but now I have nothing." Ryan couldn't imagine the depth of her despair. He knew that while her physical wounds might heal, the emotional scars would take much longer. Her story struck a chord with Ryan. He had dedicated his life to healing others, but he realized that healing wasn't just about performing surgery or providing medical care. It was about offering people hope, something Morgan had lost. She had been knocked down by life in the harshest possible way, and now she was finding her way back, little by little. And Ryan couldn't ignore the fact that she needed help, just as much as his other patients did. "I don't know what I can do for you, but I want to help," Ryan said gently. He wasn't just offering her a roof over her head, he was offering her the chance to rebuild her life, piece by piece. "You can stay here until you get back on your feet. I'll help you in any way I can." Morgan was hesitant at first, unsure of how to accept such an offer. She had never relied on anyone before, and the idea of depending on Ryan felt foreign to her. But something in his voice, something in his genuine compassion, made her trust him. She realized that for the first time in a long while, someone cared for her without expecting anything in return. It wasn't pity. It was kindness, the kind of kindness that could restore her faith in humanity. Over the next few days, Morgan adjusted to life in Ryan's apartment. It wasn't much, but it was safe, and it was hers. She helped with the household chores, making dinner and cleaning up. She took on small tasks that gave her a sense of purpose, and in doing so, she began to heal. As she recovered physically from the surgery, she also started to rebuild her sense of self. The woman who had once been on the brink of despair now began to find hope again, and it was because of Ryan's willingness to offer her a chance when no one else would. Ryan's decision to help Morgan was more than an act of charity. It was a turning point for him as well. He had spent so many years focused on his career, his work, that he had forgotten about the importance of human connection. Now, as he saw Morgan recover, he realized that his life needed to change. He couldn't continue down the same path, one of isolation and neglect of the things that mattered most. Helping Morgan wasn't just helping her, it was helping him find a sense of peace that had eluded him for far too long. In the days that followed, Ryan and Morgan formed an unexpected bond. They were two people from very different walks of life, yet both had been broken in different ways by the harshness of life. But together they began to heal, and in doing so, they discovered the power of kindness and human connection. Ryan had never expected that helping a homeless woman, a stranger, would lead him to uncover a hidden treasure. He had offered Morgan a place to stay temporarily, never imagining that it would be the beginning of a transformative journey for both of them. As time passed, Morgan, who had once been on the streets, had become a part of Ryan's life, and in return, he had started to find a sense of peace he hadn't realized he was missing. But as they settled into this new dynamic, life was about to surprise them in a way Ryan never saw coming. One afternoon, after Morgan had been living with Ryan for several weeks, she found herself exploring the attic of the house. She was trying to pass time while Ryan was at work, cleaning up around the house, and curious about the contents of the place that had belonged to Dennis, the former owner of the house. When Ryan had purchased the home, it had been a modest, somewhat run-down property, and though it had charm, it needed a lot of work. Dennis had passed away several years earlier, and the house had sat empty for quite some time before Ryan came along. Morgan, having grown accustomed to the house's quirks, decided to investigate the attic further. She climbed up a ladder Ryan had used to store some old furniture and found herself in a dusty, dimly lit space. The attic was unremarkable at first glance, filled with old boxes, old books, and other forgotten items. However, as Morgan wandered further into the space, she came across something intriguing. a chest sitting against the far wall. It was an old, heavy wooden chest, and there was something about it that caught her attention. There was no lock on it, but it was still sealed tight, almost as if it was waiting to be opened. Morgan didn't hesitate. She pulled the chest out and brought it down to the living room, where she and Ryan had shared many quiet moments over the last few weeks. It wasn't a big chest, but there was something about it that made her curious. She hadn't expected to find anything particularly valuable inside. It seemed more like an old keepsake, something Dennis had left behind. She called Ryan to help open it, but when they both tried to pry it open, they were confronted with a new challenge. The chest was locked. Ryan, who had never been one for easy answers, immediately tried to find a way to open the chest. They searched through the room for something to break the lock, but found nothing. After a few moments, he came up with the idea of trying to figure out if the lock had any sort of code. After all, Dennis had always been a man who believed in keeping things secure, so Ryan and Morgan began guessing possible combinations, starting with dates they thought might be significant. They first tried Dennis's birthday, then Amber's, then Morgan's, but nothing seemed to work. The frustration was building, and just as they were about to give up, Ryan suggested, "Let's try the date you and Dennis first met." Morgan was taken aback by the suggestion, as she hadn't considered it before. It seemed too obvious, but she figured it couldn't hurt to try. When she recited the date to Ryan, they both held their breath as the lock clicked open. Ryan lifted the lid, and both of them were stunned. Inside the chest was a treasure trove of jewelry, diamonds, rings, necklaces, and other sparkling gems. It was the kind of collection you would expect to find in a high-end jewelry store, not hidden away in the attic of a modest house. The jewels were neatly organized, and it quickly became clear that this was no ordinary collection. It seemed that Dennis had been hiding his wealth, perhaps in preparation for a rainy day or for his retirement. Morgan gasped as she peered inside the chest. She had no idea what to say. The jewelry was worth more than she had ever imagined, and in an instant, everything changed. This discovery was a game changer, not just because of the wealth it represented, but because it was a part of Dennis's legacy, and now it was hers. For a moment, Morgan was overwhelmed. She had been living with nothing for so long, and now she had discovered something that could change her future forever. Ryan was also stunned, but he knew that Morgan had the right to this wealth. It was Dennis's, and now that Dennis was gone, it was hers by default. Yet, Ryan's thoughts immediately turned to the moral implications of this discovery. Should they sell the jewels? Should Morgan keep them? He didn't want to get too attached to the wealth, but he knew that for Morgan, this was a life-changing moment. For her, this wealth represented not just material security, but a chance to rebuild her life and finally move on from the horrors of her past. Morgan's first instinct was to hide the chest. She feared that someone might take it from her, that it might somehow bring more trouble into her life. But Ryan reassured her that it was hers, that she deserved it after everything she had been through. Together, they decided to store the jewelry safely in a bank, keeping it out of sight until Morgan could decide what to do with it. For the first time in a long while, Morgan felt like she had some control over her life. As they sat in the living room, Ryan and Morgan reflected on the strange turn of events. What had started as a simple act of kindness, offering a homeless woman a place to stay, had now led to a discovery that would change both their lives. They had both found something unexpected. Morgan had found financial security, and Ryan had found a renewed sense of purpose in helping others. In the days that followed, as they began to navigate their new circumstances, Ryan and Morgan realized that their lives were forever intertwined. The wealth was important, but what mattered more was the bond they had formed. They had both been lost in their own ways, but together they had found a way forward, one built on trust, compassion, and a newfound hope for the future. With the unexpected discovery of the treasure in the attic, Ryan and Morgan's lives had begun to change in ways neither of them had anticipated. What had started as a simple act of kindness, offering Morgan a place to stay, had now blossomed into something much deeper. Morgan, once a homeless woman with no future, was now living with newfound hope, having discovered the wealth her late husband had hidden. For Ryan, this discovery had also sparked an internal journey, one that made him reflect on the true value of his own life. He had saved countless lives as a surgeon, but this was the first time he felt that his actions had genuinely made a difference in someone else's future. As Morgan settled into her new life, Ryan knew that it was time for her to confront the painful past that had led her to this point. Despite the treasure she had found, Morgan still carried the scars of betrayal, particularly the painful relationship with her stepdaughter, Amber. Amber had played a significant role in Morgan's downfall, throwing her out onto the streets after Dennis's death. She had been the catalyst for Morgan's entire spiral into homelessness, and Morgan had never truly dealt with the pain of that abandonment. For Ryan, the discovery of Amber's cruelty toward Morgan had been an eye-opener. He had witnessed firsthand how Amber had treated Morgan with disdain, yet he couldn't fully grasp the extent of the damage she had caused. Now that they had both found the treasure hidden in the attic, Ryan realized that it was time for Morgan to confront Amber, not only to reclaim what was rightfully hers, but also to heal the wounds that had been left open for too long. Morgan was reluctant to revisit the past, especially Amber. But Ryan could see that she needed closure. He could sense that Morgan wasn't going to be able to move forward until she had faced the betrayal that had shaped her journey. Morgan had already forgiven Amber in her heart, but she still needed to address the situation directly. It wasn't just about the house or the wealth. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her self-worth, and ultimately, her power over her own life. After much encouragement from Ryan, Morgan finally agreed to confront Amber. They arranged to meet in a neutral place, the local coffee shop where they had once shared quiet moments. Morgan knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that this conversation was something she couldn't avoid any longer. She needed to speak to Amber face to face and finally let go of the bitterness that had held her back for so long. When the day arrived, Morgan felt a mix of nerves and resolve. As she entered the coffee shop, she saw Amber sitting at a table, her posture rigid, her expression distant. Morgan could feel the weight of the years of resentment between them, but she took a deep breath and walked toward the table. Amber didn't immediately acknowledge her presence, but Morgan knew she had to break the silence. "Amber," Morgan began, her voice calm but firm. "I think it's time we talked." Amber looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. She knew this conversation was inevitable, but she hadn't prepared herself for it. Morgan sat down across from her, her hands folded neatly on the table. "I've thought a lot about everything that happened between us," Morgan continued. "About how you threw me out when Dennis died. I've had time to think, and I realize that I can't keep carrying this anger. It's destroying me, and I need to let it go." Amber's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to speak, but Morgan held up a hand to stop her. "But there's something I need from you, Amber. I need you to understand how much that hurt. I was already grieving, already feeling lost, and then you pushed me away. You made me feel like I wasn't even human anymore." Amber looked down at her hands, her eyes filled with shame. For the first time, she saw the depth of the damage she had caused. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I was angry. I was hurt too. I lost my father and I didn't know how to deal with it. But what I did to you, it was wrong. I can't take it back." Morgan listened to her, the words she had been waiting to hear finally coming out of Amber's mouth. Amber wasn't offering excuses, and she wasn't trying to justify her actions. She was finally acknowledging the pain she had caused. Morgan felt a sense of relief wash over her, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. "I didn't expect an apology, Amber," Morgan said softly. "But I needed to hear it, and I needed to hear that you understood what you did to me. It wasn't just the house, it was everything. You took away my family. You made me feel like I had no place to go." Amber nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Morgan. I know I can't undo the damage I've done, but I want you to know that I regret how I treated you. I never should have pushed you away. I wish I could go back and do things differently." For the first time, Morgan felt a sense of closure. The woman who had once been her stepdaughter, the one who had cast her aside, was finally owning up to her actions. And in that moment, Morgan realized that she didn't need to hold on to the anger any longer. She could forgive Amber, not for her sake, but for her own. Letting go of the past was the only way Morgan could truly move forward. "I forgive you, Amber," Morgan said, her voice steady. "But I need to move on with my life now. I'm not the same person I was when you kicked me out. I'm stronger. And I'm finally going to live for myself, not for anyone else." Amber wiped her eyes, nodding. "I understand, Morgan. I just hope you know that I'm truly sorry." As the conversation ended, both women stood up. Amber gave Morgan a tentative hug, a gesture that spoke volumes about the long journey they had both taken. It was a moment of healing, not just for Morgan, but for Amber as well. They had both been victims in their own way, and now they were starting to rebuild. When Morgan left the coffee shop, she felt a weight lift from her heart. She was finally free of the past, and she could now look forward to the future with a sense of peace. With Ryan by her side and her newfound strength, she knew that no matter what happened next, she would never again be defined by the pain of her past. As the days passed, Ryan and Morgan's lives began to settle into a new rhythm. The turmoil of their pasts was beginning to fade as they both found solace in the quiet companionship they shared. What had started as an act of kindness, offering Morgan a place to stay, had evolved into something deeper. Ryan, once a man consumed by his career and a broken marriage, had begun to rediscover parts of himself he had lost. He was no longer just a doctor. He was a man who was learning the true meaning of compassion, connection, and the importance of relationships. Morgan, too, had begun to rebuild her life. The woman who had once been wandering the streets, homeless and broken, was now working at a local beauty salon. She had slowly regained her confidence and independence, all while helping Ryan with small tasks around the house. They had come to rely on each other in ways they never expected. For Morgan, it was the first time in years that she had felt truly cared for. And for Ryan, it was the first time in a long time that he felt at peace. Ryan's decision to invite Morgan into his life was one that had been hard for him to make. He had spent so many years dedicating himself to his work that he had forgotten how to live. But through his interactions with Morgan, he had discovered that there was more to life than saving lives in the operating room. There was the simple joy of helping someone in need, of creating a space where both people could heal. One evening, after a long day at the hospital, Ryan sat down with Morgan to discuss their plans. "I've been thinking," he began, "about the house, the land. It feels like the right place for us to build something new. Not just a house, but a life. Maybe it's time to think about what comes next." Morgan listened quietly, unsure of where the conversation would go. But her heart was full of hope. She had never imagined that she would find herself here, living in a house she could call her own, helping to shape a future with someone who cared about her. "You really think so?" she asked softly. "You think this could be something real?" Ryan smiled, a rare, genuine smile that had become more frequent in recent months. "I don't just think so. I know so." Together, they began to make plans for the future. They decided to renovate the house and turn it into a comfortable home. It was a large task, but Ryan was no longer intimidated by challenges. He had learned that life wasn't about avoiding difficulties, but about facing them head-on. He wanted to build a life with Morgan, a life that was not defined by the pain of their pasts, but by the promise of something better. As the renovation began, Ryan and Morgan spent weekends working together, cleaning, painting, and planning the changes that would turn the house into their home. The physical labor was tiring, but it brought them closer, allowing them to bond over shared goals and the satisfaction of seeing their hard work pay off. They laughed together, shared stories, and dreamed about what the future might hold. Morgan was particularly excited about the garden. She had always loved nature, and the house was situated in a beautiful location with plenty of space for a large garden. She began planting flowers, herbs, and vegetables, and as the garden bloomed, so did her sense of hope. For the first time, in a long time, she felt like she had control over her life. The past was still a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She was building a new future, and it was one filled with possibilities. As the weeks went by, their relationship deepened. Ryan began to realize that he had been so focused on his work and the demands of his career that he had neglected the simple joys of life. Morgan, in her quiet way, had shown him that life wasn't just about saving others. It was about living fully, sharing moments, and being present for the people who mattered. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their newly renovated house, watching the sunset, Ryan turned to Morgan. "You know, I never thought I'd end up here," he said, his voice reflective. "I've spent so many years trying to be perfect at my job, trying to make everyone else's life better. But you've shown me something I didn't even know I needed. You've helped me rediscover who I am." Morgan smiled, her heart full. "I think we've both helped each other," she said. "I never thought I'd be here either, sitting on a porch with someone who cares about me. But here we are, starting fresh." Ryan reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We've got a lot ahead of us," he said. "But I'm ready to face it, with you." And so, with each passing day, their bond grew stronger. The house, once a place of solitude and isolation for Ryan, became a home filled with love and laughter. The work was far from over, but the foundation had been laid for the house, for their relationship, and for the future they were building together. In the end, both Ryan and Morgan realized that the treasure they had found wasn't the jewelry in the attic or the house they were renovating. The true treasure was the connection they had made with each other. In helping Morgan, Ryan had found a sense of purpose that went beyond his work. And in Ryan, Morgan had found a person who saw her not as a broken woman, but as someone worthy of love and respect. They had both discovered that the greatest gift life could offer was the chance to start again, to build something new from the ashes of their pasts. And together, they would face whatever the future had in store for them.